The sound of footsteps echoed through the business-class cabin as Marcus Hayes, CEO of Hayes Dynamics, was asked to step away from the very seat that bore his own name. The boarding pass in his hand clearly read Seat 2A, but in an instant, that seat belonged to someone else, a white man with a relaxed smile and a leather briefcase that screamed money. Flight attendant Heather Collins pressed her lips together. "Mr. Hayes, please follow us outside so we can recheck your ticket," she said softly, as if speaking to a child who needed coaxing. But her eyes carried a strange caution, a quiet distance that cut deeper than words. Marcus rose slowly, every movement measured and deliberate. With each step, he felt the weight of curious, indifferent stares sweeping through the cabin like a cold current. In row 2, a white man in a grey suit, Blake Turner, had already taken seat, 2A, opening his laptop and putting on headphones without so much as a glance in Marcus's direction. From the cockpit doorway, a tall security officer approached his uniform, sharp, his presence commanding. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, voice low and authoritative. "No, just a small mix-up with the seating," Heather replied, her tone dropping by half. Marcus looked directly into her eyes then, at the officer. "I don't think there's any mix-up," he said evenly. "My ticket clearly says 2A and I checked in yesterday." No one responded. He took a deep breath, pulled out his phone, and spoke in a calm but cutting voice. "It's happening again. Initiate Protocol Omega." No one understood what he meant, but to Marcus, that single sentence drew the line between tolerance and defiance. From that moment, the conflict was no longer about a seat. It was about dignity, justice, and a system far too comfortable pushing people like him into lower rows. 3 hours earlier, in the penthouse apartment overlooking downtown Atlanta, the cold gold light of dawn spread across the floor. Marcus was already awake before the alarm. Discipline had always been the one habit he refused to surrender. 5 o'clock meant 15 minutes of meditation, 30 minutes of running, and 10 minutes reviewing the financial news. Everything flowed in perfect order, as if the world itself still moved to his rhythm. But when he looked in the mirror, something in his eyes had changed. It wasn't just the exhaustion of months spent negotiating a billion-dollar merger. It was the look of a man too familiar with the quiet need to stay calm in the face of injustice. He thought of the small house in Southside Chicago, where he once studied under the flickering yellow light from a gas station across the street. He thought of his mother, a woman who worked 2 jobs. Her hands cracked, and voice hoarse, yet always steady when she said, "People can take everything from you, Marcus, but they can never take your knowledge." Those words became his armor, the invisible shield between himself and the world. At 7 o'clock, his driver, Ramon Ortiz, was waiting in the lobby. "Good morning, sir. The flight's still on schedule," Ramon said. Marcus nodded, sliding into the back seat and scanning the news headlines. From the front, Ramon's voice carried a hesitant note. "You know my cousin works at the airport. He says TSA's been looking at some people a little harder lately. I'm sure you know what I mean." Marcus gave a faint smile. "I have a business class ticket. TSA pre-check a spotless record. Everything's in order." Ramon met his eyes briefly in the mirror, his expression softening. "Yes, sir. It's just, sometimes the papers don't tell the whole story." Marcus said nothing. He understood. He had lived that unspoken truth his entire life, but he didn't think it would happen again. Not today. Not to him. Not to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, recently hailed by Fortune magazine as the symbol of a new generation of leadership. At the VIP check-in counter, the young attendant smiled professionally. "We've kept seat 2A reserved for you, as always. Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Hayes." Everything unfolded flawlessly. In the lounge, he chose a quiet corner, sipped his coffee, and reviewed his presentation for the New York meeting. Then a timid voice broke the silence behind him. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Marcus Hayes?" A young man, no more than 25, stood nervously clutching a tablet. "My name's Devin Harris. I'm launching a platform to help black farmers connect with urban markets. I saw your TED talk and you've really inspired me." Marcus smiled, shaking his hand. "No need to thank me. Send me your business plan." "Here's my email," he said, jotting it down on a card. "I'd like to see how you plan to change the world." Devin's hands trembled as he took the card, his face glowing with disbelief. When the young man left, Marcus watched him go, a rare feeling stirring inside him, a sense of responsibility. The duty of someone who had climbed the mountain only to realize how many others were still held at its base. 9:10 in the morning. Gate 17 began boarding. Marcus joined the priority line. Ahead of him, a white couple laughed lightly, chatting about their vacation in Manhattan. The gate agent greeted them with a broad, cheerful smile. When Marcus stepped forward, the smile disappeared. "Boarding pass and ID, please." She studied them closely, looking up at him, then back down at the screen. 30 long seconds passed before she finally returned them. "Enjoy your flight," she said flatly. Marcus nodded, silent, walking down the jetway. At the aircraft door flight attendant, Heather greeted passengers. To the man before him, she offered a warm bow and a bright, "Have a wonderful flight, sir." To Marcus, she simply said, "Boarding pass." He handed it over, still polite. She frowned slightly. "You're in seat 2, correct?" "That's right. May I see your ID?" Marcus's brow furrowed. "I just showed it at the gate. We need to re-verify." Her tone was calm, but her eyes held the same wary suspicion that so often disguised itself as procedure. Marcus handed over his ID. She examined it, gave a curt nod, and stepped aside. 2A to your right. As he walked to his seat, a chill rippled through him, despite the warm air in the cabin. He had no idea that within minutes, this short flight from Atlanta to New York would become the center of national attention, and that one seat, marked 2A, would turn into a symbol of the fight for fairness he could no longer avoid. Settling in, he buckled his seatbelt and glanced out the window. Below, a line of small aircraft taxied toward the runway, each one like a dream waiting its turn to rise. Marcus whispered quietly to himself, "One day, no one will have to prove they deserve to sit here." What he didn't know was that day was beginning right now on this very flight. The sound of a seatbelt clicking echoed sharply. The plane hadn't even left the ground when Marcus Hayes was asked to vacate his seat. Heather Collins, the composed flight attendant, stood beside seat 2A, holding a tablet displaying the seating chart. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her tone firm but laced with a forced politeness, "it seems our system registered a duplicate seat assignment. Please step outside for a moment while we verify the situation." Marcus turned his head, scanning the cabin. The business-class passengers began to look up, their curious eyes shifting between him, the attendant, and the boarding pass in his hand. In the front row, Blake Turner, a white man with slicked-back hair and a gleaming Rolex, was speaking to another attendant, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "There's no mistake. I always book seat 2A. Always. Marcus's lips curved slightly. "I'm sorry, but I have the boarding pass for this very seat." He held it up. Heather glanced at it, her expression faltering for just a second before quickly averting her gaze. "Yes, but according to the system's seat, 2A has now been reassigned to Mr. Turner." The cabin fell into silence. Marcus felt the rush of heat rising in his chest. This wasn't the first time. The feeling the moment when you know you're right, but are treated as the one causing trouble, was painfully familiar. He took a slow breath. "There must be some mistake," he said calmly. "I checked in yesterday and this ticket was confirmed. I will not leave my seat unless there's a valid reason." His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. From the cabin door, the lead flight attendant, Kyle Rogers, appeared, followed by a man in plain clothes with a guarded stance, the air marshal. Everyone immediately understood the situation had been escalated. Kyle forced a smile. "Mr. Hayes, we just need to clarify a few things. Please step out onto the jetway for a few minutes. He didn't do anything wrong." The voice of Mrs. Evelyn Brooks rang out from across the aisle, clear and resolute. "He's been sitting quietly in his seat from the start. I saw it myself." But Kyle ignored her. Marcus recognized the cold steel in their eyes, the same look he had seen at airport security checkpoints, in boardrooms in early jobs interviews. The look that said, "Don't disrupt the system." He rose each movement, deliberate, steady, dignified. "All right," he said. "But I want it recorded that I was asked to leave my assigned seat to make room for someone else." "Of course," Kyle replied quickly, avoiding eye contact. Marcus stepped into the jetway, his footsteps echoing through the narrow corridor. Outside, the air was cold, unnaturally still. 4 people stood in a line before him: Kyle Heather, the air marshal, and Patricia Wells, the gate manager, forming a quiet wall. Patricia spoke first. "Mr. Hayes, we're very sorry. It appears there was a system error, and your seat was duplicated during the flight update. We can arrange another seat for you." Marcus stayed composed. "Another seat?" he said slowly. "You mean in economy?" She nodded slightly. "Yes, but it will be an economy plus seat with extra legroom." In that instant, Marcus felt something sharp cut through his chest, a familiar insult wrapped in courtesy. He looked around. 4 faces waited for his reaction. Calmly, he pulled out his phone and opened the voice recorder. "I'm sorry," he said evenly. "I'm just documenting this. If I'm being asked to leave my assigned seat, I need a record." Heather quickly interjected, "So recording staff members is against company policy." Marcus replied, voice cool and controlled, "I'm not recording employees. I'm documenting my customer experience, and there's no law that forbids that." No one spoke. The air marshal folded his arms, his right hand resting near his belt, a small gesture that froze the air around them. Marcus knew exactly where he was. He knew that a single wrong move could be labeled a security threat. He inhaled deeply, pushing down the anger. "To be clear," he said, "you're asking me to leave seat 2A, which I purchased and checked in for, because of a supposed system error, without verifying the other passenger's claim." Patricia replied slowly, "We're just trying to resolve this quickly, so the flight isn't delayed. Meaning I have to leave, so others aren't inconvenienced. We apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Hayes." He looked each of them in the eye. "I'll take the economy seat," he said, "but I'll do it under protest." The words were calm, but struck like a hammer. Patricia exhaled, relieved. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir. We'll make a note of it." As he re-entered the cabin, Marcus sent a text to Lauren Discrimination Incident on Flight. "Activate Protocol Omega. Full documentation." As he walked past the business class section, he felt every gaze. Some passengers looked away, pretending not to notice. Some looked at him with pity. Only Mrs. Evelyn Brooks nodded slightly, her eyes blazing with shared anger and empathy. Blake Turner sat comfortably, his laptop open lips curved into a thin smile. Marcus didn't look back. He knew sometimes silence could thunder louder than words. When he reached row 23, seat C, a young flight attendant, Chloe Nguyen, helped him stow his bag. "I'm sorry for what happened," she whispered, avoiding his eyes. "It's all right," he said, gently reassuring her. "Just remember this: never let anyone tell you that silence is safety." Chloe froze for a moment, then nodded, her eyes brightening. Marcus sat down, fastening his seatbelt across his chest. Seat 23C was smaller, colder, tighter, but inside his mind, the gears had already begun to turn. He opened his laptop and created a new file, Flight 247 Incident Report. Names, times, words, expressions, he recorded everything with meticulous precision. The man seated beside him, a middle-aged black professor with salt and pepper hair, was reading Critical Race Theory, an Introduction. He glanced over, offering a knowing smile. "I saw what happened," he said quietly. "You handled that with remarkable composure. I'm Samuel Porter, professor at Columbia University. You're Marcus Hayes, aren't you?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, but today I'm just a passenger in row 23. Samuel smiled. "No. Today you're rewriting my syllabus." Marcus let out a soft laugh, though it tasted bitter. He didn't know that in just a few hours, this small moment, a CEO sitting in an economy seat, a passenger starting to film, and a hashtag spreading across the internet, would become a symbol of a fight far greater than any deal he had ever negotiated. The plane began to taxi. Outside the window, the morning light glinted against the wings. Marcus placed a hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm. It was no longer anger he felt, but resolve. In his mind, his mother's voice echoed, "You can't choose how people treat you, but you can choose how you respond." He looked up. The plane was lifting off, carrying him toward a journey no business plan could have predicted, a journey for justice, beginning in seat 23C and destined to end far above the clouds. The roar of the engines filled the air as the plane sliced through white clouds. Inside the cabin, things seemed calm, but beneath the surface, there was a current of anger and quiet outrage humming like live electricity. Marcus Hayes sat in seat 23C, his eyes fixed on the window, but his mind circling every detail of what had just happened. Every sentence, every sideways glance, every suspicious look was stored in his memory like living data. The man inside him, the businessman, the leader, the engineer was analyzing everything, as if it were a system failure. This was not random. This was not a technical glitch. There was something behind this seat duplication, and he could feel it clearly. Beside him, Professor Samuel Porter closed his book. He tilted his head and spoke softly. "You know, Marcus, what I just saw is not just one act of discrimination. It is a pattern, a system that has been trained to react this way." Marcus nodded slightly, still looking outside. A faulty model, but one that has been used for far too long. In the row ahead, a young woman discreetly took out her phone, snapped a photo, and started texting. 2 rows back, a college student was live streaming in a low voice. "A black CEO just got kicked out of business class. Yes, you heard that right. This is happening right now on my flight." Within 10 minutes, the first images appeared on Twitter. One photo showed Marcus standing beside the air marshal in the jetway. Another showed him sitting still in the economy cabin, his face calm, but his eyes cold. The first hashtag appeared CEO in coach, a young flight attendant walking past Chloe Nguyen, bent down and handed Marcus a can of water. As he took it, she murmured so quietly it was almost a whisper. "I emailed you. There are some things you should see." Then she walked away without looking back. Marcus opened his laptop and connected to the Wi-Fi, using his business class priority code, a code he still had access to through his top-tier membership. An email popped up from a personal address, Chloe_support at something. Inside were screenshots from the airline's seat assignment system. Seat 2. A reassigned manually 42 minutes before boarding. Note, VVIP accommodation requested by management. It was not a system error. It was a human decision, a deliberate choice. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. It was not rage this time, but something deeper. The exhaustion of someone who had seen this same pattern replay itself far too many times. He picked up his phone and texted Lauren. Confirmed manual reassignment. Initiate legal sequence, collect witness statements, full visibility protocol. On the other end, Lauren, the chief operating officer of Hays Dynamics, replied immediately. Understood. Legal and communications teams are monitoring Twitter. The hashtag is climbing. We will not interfere. We will let the truth spread on its own. Marcus looked around. He saw Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, the older woman in business class, struggling to stand as she tried to make her way to the back of the plane. Chloe gently stopped her. "Ma'am, we are still at cruising altitude. You cannot walk yet." Young Lady Evelyn said, her voice sharpening. When I was young, they told me I could not sit in the front of the bus. Now I am old, and I still see black people being pushed to the back. I will not sit quietly. Business class went silent. Chloe bit her lip, then stepped aside. With slow, steady steps, Evelyn walked down the aisle, every pair of eyes following her. When she reached row 23, she placed her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Are you all right, son?" Marcus looked up and smiled. "I am all right, Mom." "No." She shook her head. "This world is not all right. But maybe today it will start to change." The middle-aged man next to him, Professor Samuel, nodded gently. "She is right," he said. "And we will be the witnesses to that." From that moment, the economy cabin began to stir. An Indian woman in row 24 raised her hand. "I saw everything from the beginning. I can write a statement." A white couple in row 25 turned around and said to Marcus, "We are sorry we stayed silent at first." A young man with curly hair in row 22 lifted his camera. "If you allow it, I would like to record your account." There was no more indifference, no more silence. In just over an hour online, the hashtag CEOInCoach climbed to third place nationwide. The first post from the student hit 500,000 views. A local news account reposted Marcus's photo with the caption, "When equality boards last, injustice still flies. First class," followed by the explanation, "When equality exists only in theory, injustice will still be the one that gets priority in first class." Up front, near the cockpit, the mood was entirely different. Lead flight attendant Kyle gripped the interphone, his voice tight. "Yes, I understand, but this situation, yes, it is already online. No, I do not know who posted it. They say he is a CEO, some kind of tech company." On the other end, Captain Douglas Hart's voice dropped. "We need to get control of this immediately. Call me with any updates." Heather, the one who had directly asked Marcus to leave his seat, sat slumped in a jump seat at the back of the galley, her hands trembling. She stared at her phone, seeing her own face in the viral video. There she was, head bowed, voice cold, saying to Marcus, "Sir, please step outside so we can run additional checks." Below the clip, thousands of furious comments poured in. This is why people lose faith in the system. Racism in a polite uniform is still racism. Cannot believe this is still happening in the year 2025. Heather shut off the screen as tears spilled over. She had not expected it to go this far. She was just following procedure, was she not? Or had she chosen the comfort of trusting the safety of procedure instead of the rightness of basic humanity? Meanwhile, in row 23, Marcus remained composed. He said nothing, just kept writing each line short and sharp as a blade. Time removed from seat 928. Words from flight attendant Heather System shows duplicate seat. Expression of Patricia Wells avoids eye contact. Witnesses Evelyn Brooks. Samuel Porter, passengers in row 22, seat 24B. Beside him, Samuel watched and said quietly, "You are creating the most vivid, real-world case study in the history of American business." Marcus smiled faintly. "Not business history, Professor. Justice history." A notification appeared on his phone. Stock alert, Aurora Air ticker, ARX down 3.2%. Hashtag CEO in coach trend triggers investor concern. He stared at the number, feeling a mix of bitterness and clarity. All this over a single seat. One bad decision, one small act of bias, and hundreds of millions of dollars vanished from the market. That was the cost of blindness, a cost society had never really learned how to calculate. 15 minutes later, Captain Hart opened the cockpit door and stepped into the cabin. The entire plane fell silent. He walked straight to Marcus's row, his voice trying to remain steady. "Mr. Hayes, I would like to offer you my personal apology. We can move you back to seat 2A if you would like." Every gaze turned to Marcus. He looked up and answered calmly, "Thank you, Captain, but I think I will stay where I am. I do not want to cause any further disturbance to this flight." The words were gentle, but everyone understood he was refusing a late attempt to fix what should never have been broken. Captain Hart stood still for a few seconds, then nodded and walked away. Up front, Chloe caught Marcus's eye. She pressed her lips together, as if she wanted to say something, but held it back. Marcus looked around and saw Evelyn Samuel, the other passengers, and in their eyes he saw the same thing, anger awakened, and a new sense of belief just beginning to ignite. He opened his laptop and added one last line to the report. "This is not about a seat. It is about who gets to belong." The plane continued to cut through the clouds, but the real storm, the storm of awareness and justice, had only just begun to form. Outside the window, the sky was calm and blue, but in seat 23, invisible waves were spreading like lightning. Marcus Hayes's phone buzzed non-stop messages from Lauren and the communications team, flashing one after another. Lauren wrote, "The hashtag CEO InCoach just hit 2 million views in 40 minutes. CNN and CNBC have picked it up. The internal comms report followed Aurora Air's stock, continues to fall down 5.4%. The company's CEO has left his meeting and is demanding an immediate briefing." Marcus read it and gave a faint, wry smile. It wasn't the smile of victory, but of someone who knew that the chain reaction had begun. He typed a short message. No media response. Let the facts speak. Across from him, Professor Samuel Porter observed the scene with a mix of anger and fascination. He spoke softly, as if lecturing in a classroom. "You see, Marcus, what's remarkable here is that power no longer sits in a seat, it lives in the story. and you've just created a story the whole world will have to hear." Marcus's smile faded. "I don't want a story. I want to change the system that keeps creating them." Flight attendant Chloe Nguyen passed by her hands, trembling slightly, as she set a tray of water on Marcus's table. "Mr. Hayes," she whispered up front. "They're on a satellite call with headquarters. I heard your name mentioned several times." Marcus looked up. "What did you hear?" "Just a few words. PR, crisis containment, compensation package. And who authorized it?" "Thank you," Marcus replied quietly. Chloe nodded and stepped back. Her eyes filled with both fear and hope, like someone who had just crossed the line between safety and what was right, knowing she might lose her job for it. At the front of the plane lead attendant, Kyle was trying to stay calm, but sweat was gathering at his collar. "Captain Hart," he said into the interphone, "I don't think we can contain this anymore. Passengers are recording everything, and he's actually influential. I just checked his company provides the booking software our airline uses." Captain Hart's voice came through from the cockpit, deep and tense. "What you mean?" "Hayes Dynamics." "Yes, sir. They run the AeroLink platform we use for ticketing." A heavy silence filled the line, then the captain's voice dropped lower. "God, notify headquarters immediately. Don't take any further action without instruction." Back in economy, Marcus kept typing. Next to him, Samuel glanced at the laptop screen, reading the lines. 10:42 a.m. Confirmed manual seat reassignment. Direct connection. Patricia Wells, Blake Turner, Rydell Tech. Supporting passengers, Evelyn Brooks, Samuel Porter, Chloe Nguyen. #now #1 nationwide. "Are you compiling a legal report?" Samuel asked. Marcus answered quietly, "No. I'm creating precedent." He paused, eyes drifting toward the window. "You know, Professor, I used to believe that if you worked hard, followed every rule and succeeded, you'd be treated fairly. But I've realized success doesn't make you immune to bias. It only makes the bias more sophisticated." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "That's a line I'm going to use in my next lecture." Suddenly the intercom crackled to life with Captain Hart's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising at 36,000 feet. Thank you for your cooperation, and we'd like to express our appreciation to all passengers on board today." His voice faltered slightly on the word appreciation, as if he himself could feel the irony behind it. Passengers began glancing at one another, sensing that something far bigger was unfolding than what they had been told. In business class, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, the witness to everything, took out her phone and started a live stream. "Hello, everyone. I'm a passenger on Flight 247. I just watched a man be removed from his assigned seat to make room for someone else. And I will not stay silent." Within minutes, over 10,000 people were watching live. Comments flooded in like waves. "I'm crying. How does this still happen? I've lived through that feeling. This is why we need people like him." From his seat, Marcus saw Evelyn returning, holding out her phone for him to see. "You're live, Marcus," she said. He smiled softly. "Then let them all see. No need to hide." Just then, his phone lit up again, another message from Lauren. "Aurora Air, stock down 7.8%. CAO Richard Coleman has left headquarters to fly to JFK. They're calling an emergency press meeting. Protocol Omega Stage 2 is active." Marcus closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. He wasn't happy nor angry, just heavy. He knew what was happening now was far beyond him. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Hart received another call from headquarters. "Captain, the CEO is flying to New York. The press and shareholders are in uproar. We need you to act immediately. Invite Mr. Hayes back to business class. Show that we've corrected the mistake." Hart stayed silent for a few moments. He remembered Marcus's calm eyes when he had refused to return to his seat, eyes without hatred or rage, but filled with a clarity that saw straight through the polite surface of the system. "No," Hart said quietly. "I don't think he's coming back." "Then do whatever it takes. Just don't let the media get another scene." "Understood, understood." Hart replied, his voice heavy as stone. Chloe passed by again, stopping briefly beside Marcus. "They're panicking up there," she whispered. "They know you're not just any passenger." Marcus looked at her. "And are you afraid?" She smiled, a sad but steady smile. "Of course. But sometimes silence is even scarier." Marcus nodded, his voice softening. "Thank you. Big changes start with small acts of courage." Suddenly, a new alert popped up on his screen from Lauren. "Report Rydell Tech down 8% after being linked to the incident. Media uncovered the connection between Blake Turner and Patricia Wells." Marcus stared at the screen, feeling a mix of sadness and pride, not for anyone's downfall, but because justice had finally gained weight in the marketplace. Professor Samuel leaned closer, his voice deliberate. "Do you know why I still teach about inequality after 50? Because I used to think I could change the system from inside a classroom. But today, I've seen someone change it mid-air." Marcus replied quietly, "No one can change the world without letting the world see what's wrong with it." The plane began to tremble slightly, the signal to prepare for descent. Through the window, the shimmering skyline of New York came into view. Marcus closed his laptop and looked straight ahead. "Now," he said softly, "let's see how they face the truth when we land." And at 36,000 feet, as the sunlight glinted off the metal wings, Marcus Hayes understood. Justice can fly, too, if someone is brave enough to pilot it. The dull thud of the landing gear hitting the runway rippled through the aircraft, a deep sound that sent a shudder down the fuselage. Flight 247 of Aurora Air had landed at John F. Kennedy, but no one rushed to unbuckle their seatbelt. The air felt heavy, as if everyone silently understood that the most important part of this flight was not over yet. From the cockpit, Captain Hart's voice came over the intercom, strained and awkward. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Please remain seated. We will provide further information shortly regarding deplaning procedures." The unfinished sentence sounded less like an update and more like a warning. Through the small oval window, Marcus Hayes could see it clearly. Instead of taxiing toward Gate 32 as usual, the plane had stopped in a remote holding area far from the main terminal. Outside, several black vans were parked in position, and a line of people in dark suits waited on the tarmac. Marcus looked at Professor Samuel Porter. You see that Samuel nodded, his voice low. "I have read about crisis management, but this is the first time I have seen them try to hide the crisis from the cameras." A voice rose from a few rows back. "What the hell is this? Why are we stopping out here?" Another passenger shouted. "We have a right to disembark, according to regulations." The murmurs spread, swelling into a wave of frustration. Aurora Air had chosen the worst strategy, trying to hide the truth in front of hundreds of witnesses. Heather Collins, the flight attendant who had ordered Marcus out of his seat, was shaking in the front galley. She had just received a message from the management team. The company's CEO, Richard Coleman, is on his way. Prepare for the possibility that he will board the aircraft. Heather pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. She had never seen the chief executive officer step into the cabin before. not to greet guests, but to try to save the reputation of a corporation burning across social media. Kyle, the lead flight attendant, approached her and whispered, "Heather, be careful. Anything you say now could be recorded or streamed live." She only nodded, lips pressed tightly together. Her mind flashed back to that very first moment in the jetway, when she had doubted Marcus. Just a second. Just a look, and now the whole world was judging her for it. Meanwhile, Marcus was speaking quietly with Samuel. "My headquarters just told me this," he said. "Aurora's chief executive is flying to JFK on a private jet. They want to control the narrative before facing the press." Samuel let out a bitter laugh. "So they are planning to muzzle justice with a staged public apology?" "No," Marcus replied, his eyes turning cold. "They are trying to stop their stock from falling any further." He unlocked his phone. The signal had returned. A new message from his chief operating officer, Lauren Mitchell, appeared. Aurora Air down 9.3%. Board of Directors in emergency session. Media calling it the business class bias scandal. "The whole country is talking about you." Marcus drew a deep breath. There was no satisfaction in his face. Instead, he thought of his mother, who had once stood patiently in a checkout line, waiting her turn only to be cut in front of by someone else, while she simply smiled. "Do not answer with anger," she had told him. "Let justice do that." Now justice was beginning to speak with the power of a vast web of data media and people who had decided they would no longer stay silent. Suddenly the intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, for your safety, please remain seated until further instructions are given." A chorus of protests erupted. "We want to get off this plane. This is unlawful detention." The noise grew louder by the second. Marcus turned to Samuel and said softly, "They are stalling for time so the public relations team can get here." Samuel replied, "They forgot that now every passenger is the press." It was true. Dozens of phones were raised in the air. Live streams, recordings, real-time commentary. In less than 15 minutes, Twitter was flooded with videos of angry passengers tagging Aurora Air, tagging CEO Coleman, tagging the hashtag Justice in the Sky. Chloe walked toward the rear, leaning in close. "Mr. Hayes, they want you to meet with the company representatives." Marcus lifted an eyebrow. "Who, Captain Hart? He says the CEO is requesting to speak with you directly before they open the doors. We're right here in this cabin." A minute later, Captain Hart stepped out of the cockpit. His face was drawn, his eyes showing every ounce of pressure he was under. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "CEO. Coleman is waiting outside on the tarmac. He would like to speak with you in private before the media arrives." Marcus answered slowly, "I have nothing to say in private. Any conversation must happen in front of witnesses here." Hart hesitated. "Sir, I have been ordered to ask." "And I?" Marcus replied, his gaze like steel and following a protocol as well, the protocol of truth. Samuel leaned slightly toward him and murmured, "You know, this is the moment they realize that real power is not in the hands of the one holding the microphone, but in the hands of the one holding a conscience." 5 minutes later, the aircraft door opened. A rush of cold air poured in, along with the roar of engines and the wind on the runway. 3 people in suits boarded the plane, led by Richard Coleman, the chief executive officer of Aurora Air. He looked to be in his early 60s, tall with a face that had often appeared on magazine covers, wearing a confident smile. Today, that smile was gone, replaced by unease and fear. Coleman walked straight to row 23. Seat C bowed his head slightly and spoke in a deliberately gentle tone. "Mr. Hayes, I am Richard Coleman. I would like to offer my sincere apology for this unfortunate incident." Marcus looked up and met his eyes. "Unfortunate is when you spill coffee on someone's shirt, Mr. Coleman. This was an insult, systemic and deliberate." The atmosphere thickened. The cabin dropped into absolute silence. Samuel unlocked his phone and started a recording. Coleman noticed but did not dare object. "We are prepared to offer compensation, upgrade your membership for life, and—" Marcus cut him off. "You misunderstand. I do not need an upgrade. I need your system to downgrade its prejudice." Coleman froze. The glow from dozens of phone screens reflected on his face, every muscle movement captured. Marcus continued. "Your staff tried to cover it up, stopping this plane out here to avoid the media. They forgot that the media is already on this flight." A wave of applause rose from the economy cabin. Evelyn Brooks, the elderly woman who had stood up for him at the beginning, rose with the help of her cane and spoke loudly. "He is not asking for special treatment. He is demanding dignity for all of us." Coleman stood rigid, forcing a strained smile. "We will address this as soon as we are back on the ground, Mr. Hayes." Marcus nodded, his voice low. "Good. Start by investigating the connection between your gate manager, Patricia Wells, and Blake Turner of Rydell Tech. I believe you will find many interesting details." Coleman's face went pale. He stepped back. "How did you know? My company built the operating software for your system. Every change, every log entry is stored. Would you like me to send a copy to your board of directors?" The cabin erupted in whispers, some people clapping, others simply staring in disbelief. Coleman stood speechless. After a moment, he said, his voice unsteady, "We will discuss this with our legal team." Marcus gave a slight nod. "Do that. But next time, remember this: never force justice to sit in row 23. As Coleman left the plane, the passengers burst into a swell of emotion. They cheered, shook Marcus's hand, some of them in tears. Professor Samuel spoke quietly, his voice thick with feeling. "You just turned humiliation into power, and you made an entire system bow before a single principle, the truth." Marcus looked around, his eyes shining with something deeper than pride. Amid the noise, he heard his mother's voice echo in his mind. "You do not need to shout to be heard. You only need to stand your ground and let what is right shine on its own." The aircraft fell silent again. No one on board yet knew that outside cameras were already aimed at the door, ready to capture the moment the story of #CEO in Coach would become a flame for millions of people who had been treated unfairly. And as Marcus looked out the New York sunset, reflecting off the worn silver body of the plane, he understood this. A new era of justice had just taken off, right in the place where it had once been denied. As the aircraft door swung open, a gust of cold wind rushed in, carrying with it the roar of the airport and the rapid clicking of camera shutters. Every passenger leaned toward the windows, seeing dozens of reporters waiting outside, cameras, raised microphones, ready, flashes firing in bursts of light. Flight 247, which should have been a simple 2-hour journey, had now become a national breaking news story. Marcus Hayes remained seated, his hands clasped together, his face unnervingly calm. In front of him, Captain Hart stepped closer, his voice rough with tension. "Mr. Hayes, we are trying to arrange a separate deplaning route to avoid chaos." Marcus looked straight at him, his tone quiet but sharp. Are you trying to avoid chaos or avoid television cameras? Hart froze, unable to answer. Marcus rose to his feet. Do not worry, I will not cause a disturbance. I just want to leave this plane like any other passenger, strictly according to procedure. Every word landed like a cold blade, cutting through the excuses the system clung to. In the cabin, passengers began gathering their belongings, but no one hurried to leave. A strange atmosphere spread a solemn silence, as if they all knew they were witnessing something far bigger than a single flight. In the row ahead, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks pushed herself up with her cane. You go first, Marcus, she said. The whole country is going to see how you walk out of here. Marcus nodded gently. Not just me, Mum. All of us. Chloe Nguyen stepped forward, her eyes red. I have already been called in by human resources as soon as we landed, she whispered. But I do not regret it. I have sent all the evidence to my personal email already. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. If they fire you for telling the truth, then let me hire you for that exact reason. Chloe let out a shaky laugh as tears rolled down her cheeks. That is the fairest deal I have ever had. The loudspeaker crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until you receive instructions from ground staff. But no one was really listening anymore. A man stood up and shouted, They cannot keep us here. Open the door. Applause and shouts spread through the cabin. A group of passengers raised their phones, pointing the cameras toward Marcus. Professor Samuel Porter stood up beside him, his voice ringing clear. As passengers on this flight, I demand that Aurora Air comply with aviation regulations and take us to a proper gate, not keep us here to manage public relations. This is no longer just a flight. This is a courtroom in the sky. A wave of applause erupted. Captain Hart looked around, sweat beading on his forehead, then finally nodded. All right, I understand. We will taxi to gate 32. As the plane began to move, passengers jumped to their feet, recording live streaming. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeInTheSky and the hashtag CEO in coach surged to the #1 spot worldwide. News outlets cut into live coverage. Hundreds of passengers challenge an airline directly on the tarmac as a black CEO becomes a symbol of justice. Marcus glanced at Samuel and murmured, Can you believe it? The world is changing right here on this runway. Samuel gave a faint smile. Not changing, Marcus. This is the landing of the truth. When the aircraft stopped at gate 32, the seatbelt signs went off and the door opened. The passengers stood waiting together. Instead of ground staff, the first person to step into the cabin was CEO Richard Coleman, this time without a public relations team or assistants at his side. His face was pale. His suit rumpled his eyes, hollow from lack of sleep. Coleman stopped in the middle of the cabin, his voice hoarse. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to offer my deepest apology. What happened today does not reflect the values Aurora Air stands for. We will correct this. We will compensate. We will... His words broke off as a passenger shouted, Compensation cannot erase prejudice. Then another voice. Sorry is not enough if the system stays the same. Coleman gripped the handle of his briefcase tighter, trying to hold himself together. He turned to Marcus, who was still sitting, gaze steady. Mr. Hayes, I am hoping to speak with you privately. We need to find a solution together. Marcus smiled, but his smile was as cold as the air at 36,000 feet. A solution, I already have one, Mr. Coleman. It is called transparency, and I am going to apply it right here in front of everyone. He turned to Samuel. "Professor, may I borrow your microphone?" Samuel stood and handed him his phone with the speaker turned on. Marcus took it, his deep voice carrying through the cabin. "Today I was not just reassigned. I was moved to the row that your system decided I was more appropriate." 4. But when a person is pushed down because of their skin color, it is no longer an individual issue. It is the failure of a society. The cabin was utterly silent. Everyone held their breath. I do not need special treatment. I just want a flight where human worth is not calculated by a zip code or a skin tone. And if Aurora Air truly wants to make this right, start with the truth. Confirm who changed the seat, who approved it, and why. Marcus's eyes burned through Coleman, not trembling, not angry, but resolute, the eyes of a man who knew he was standing on the line between the personal and the historical. Coleman bowed his head and sighed. "We will conduct a full investigation," Marcus went on. "Not just an investigation. I want you to bring me into your upcoming board meeting. Because my company Hayes Dynamics runs your ticketing platform. If there is no real change, that contract will not be renewed." The entire cabin was stunned. Coleman looked up, shaken. You are threatening me." "No," Marcus replied softly. "I am teaching you what corporate responsibility looks like." Applause thundered again, this time like a storm. Evelyn Brooks, eyes brimming with tears, pressed a hand to her chest and whispered, "Dear God." Finally, someone is making them listen. Coleman stepped back, defeated in front of hundreds of witnesses and millions of viewers watching live. "I will be in touch," he said weakly, "and I am sorry." Marcus nodded slightly. "Keep your word, because next time you will not be apologizing to one man, but to an entire generation." Only after Coleman left the plane did Marcus stand. The applause rolled on, spreading from economy all the way to business class. He turned to Samuel. "I used to think justice needed a courtroom, but maybe it just needs light and someone willing to switch it on." Samuel laughed softly, his voice shaking with emotion. "You just lit up the whole sky, Marcus." Chloe came up beside him and whispered, "You know they are broadcasting this live across the country, right?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Good. Let justice get the views it deserves." He stepped out of the plane. The New York wind hit his face, carrying the smell of metal exhaust and change. In front of him, dozens of microphones and cameras pointed in his direction, reporters shouting his name, bright lights flashing like a storm. He stopped and drew a long breath. "I do not want to be a headline," he said. "I just want every flight, every company, every system to treat human beings the same. If what happened today means that tomorrow one black child gets to sit in the seat that truly belongs to them, then this was not an accident. It was a beginning." A hush fell over the chaos. Then applause, cheers, and shouts from the crowd exploded like rolling thunder. Above John F. Kennedy, the crimson sunset washed over the body of the Aurora Air jet metal that had once carried the silence of injustice, now turning into a symbol of an awakening era. Marcus looked up and whispered, "Justice does not need wings. It only needs someone steady enough not to bow their head." And he walked forward through the sea of people and the blinding glare of cameras, an ordinary man who had just forced the sky itself to change. The next morning, America woke up to a single name, Marcus Hayes. From newspaper headlines to phone screens to financial news networks, the image of a black man in a grey suit calmly walking off an Aurora Air flight under a storm of camera flashes had become the new symbol of modern justice. On CNBC, The anchor opened with the words, "What happens when a Fortune 500 CEO is removed from his business class seat because of his skin color? The answer, an airline loses 12% of its stock value, and the world begins questioning corporate equality." On Twitter, more than 10 million posts carried the hashtags CEO in coach, Justice, in the Sky, and Marcus Hayes. Black-owned newspapers called him the man who turned humiliation into revolution. Financial magazines called him the leader who forced the market to face morality. At the headquarters of Hayes Dynamics in Manhattan, the main lobby was crowded with reporters. Marcus walked in between two lines of employees, standing silently, their eyes filled with pride. Lauren Mitchell, his chief operating officer, stepped forward and handed him a tablet. "Latest update," she said. "Aurora Air has officially suspended the entire management team of Flight 247. CEO Richard Coleman has been forced into an emergency board meeting. As for Patricia Wells and Blake Turner, both are under internal investigation." Marcus said nothing, quietly scanning the report. Lauren studied him, her voice soft. "Do you regret it? If you had stayed silent, this would have disappeared like 1,000 other incidents." Marcus looked up, his eyes steady. "Regret, Lauren. I only regret that I once believed justice would take care of itself once you became successful." He paused, gazing out the window where Manhattan gleamed in the morning light. "I was wrong. Justice isn't automatic. It needs people to claim it." On the 37th floor, the emergency meeting began. The main screen displayed the agenda: Aurora Air Crisis, Media Response Strategy, Aerolink Contract. Lauren began the report. "We have 3 options. 1, terminate the contract. 2, renew only if they agree to implement customer equity reforms. 3, offer a partnership to build the ethical operations platform, the one you use to call the Washington Protocol." Marcus nodded. "It will have a new name now, the Hayes Protocol." The room fell silent. He continued, "We are not just providing ticketing software. We are going to build a bias detection system, an AI that can identify every discriminatory pattern in how employees treat customers." Lauren's eyes widened. "You're turning yesterday's incident into a commercial product, no?" Marcus replied, "Into a tool for justice." He stood looking around the room, filled with faces caught between fear and admiration. "We live in an age where data records everything except ethics. I intend to change that." In the middle of the meeting, Marcus's phone vibrated. An unknown number appeared. He answered and put it on speaker. "Mr. Hayes, this is Jackson Harper, chairman of the board at Aurora Air. I'm calling to discuss the future of our partnership." Marcus's tone stayed calm. "I'm listening, Mr. Harper. We would like to propose that Hayes Dynamics serve as Aurora's corporate culture reform advisor. I believe you have the influence to calm our shareholders." "You think I can help your stock recover?" Marcus asked evenly. "Yes, and of course we're willing to pay whatever it takes." Marcus smiled faintly, though no one could see it. "You're mistaken, Mr. Harper. I'm not interested in price. I'm interested in value. If Aurora Air truly wants to change, I'll help, but not to protect an image to transform a system." Harper hesitated. "What exactly do you want?" Marcus answered immediately, his voice firm. "Establish a National Aviation Equality Council, one that includes representatives from customers' employees and the black community. All complaint data must be public and transparent." There was silence on the line. Finally, Harper spoke quietly. "You're turning a PR incident into a civil rights movement." No, Marcus said, I'm simply reminding everyone that ethics are part of the bottom line. After the call, Lauren exhaled. You just declared war on half the airline industry. Marcus smiled. That's fine. Every storm starts with a small gust of wind. I'm just making sure it blows in the right direction. Meanwhile, at Aurora Air's headquarters, chaos was erupting. CIO Richard Coleman bowed before the board, his voice trembling. We only meant to handle it internally. We didn't expect the media to spread it so fast. The communications director shouted, You let the man who runs our core software platform turn this airline into the face of corporate racism. Do you even understand the damage? A board member slammed his fist on the table. Coleman, you'll submit your early retirement papers. We need new blood. Coleman said nothing, his face pale. He understood sometimes a single mistake, one seat, could end an entire career. That afternoon, Marcus sat in his office, watching Aurora Air's press conference on television. The anchor read aloud, Aurora Air officially announces a leadership restructuring and a partnership with Hays Dynamics to launch a new bias monitoring system known as the Hays Protocol. Lauren turned to him and said softly, You just turned a stain into a spark for change. Marcus replied, his tone calm. No, Lauren. I just made them see their own reflection and forced them to look at it. That evening his phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice trembled, but was full of emotion. Mr. Hays, I just received an offer from Aurora's HR department. They want me to come back as their diversity and ethics training advisor. But, Marcus chuckled softly, but you're planning to decline, aren't you? Yes. I want to work for someone who actually believes in it. Then come to Hays Dynamics tomorrow, he said. You'll lead the aviation division of the Hays Protocol project. On the other end, Chloe was silent for a few seconds before bursting into tears. Thank you. I never thought one small act could change my life. Marcus smiled. Sometimes justice begins with one well-timed email. Night fell. Outside New York City glowed like an ocean of artificial stars. Marcus stood at the window looking down at the avenue. In the glass reflection, he could almost see his mother, the woman who taught him never to bow his head. You don't need power to prove you're right, Marcus. You just need light to shine on what's wrong. Now that light was spreading across the sky, and he knew the storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. But this time, he wasn't alone. Down below, the electronic billboards lit up with new words. Aurora Air now partnered with Hays Protocol Equality Takes Flight. Marcus closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. Justice had landed, and this time it would never take off again without ethics on board. 3 weeks after that fateful event, applause echoed through the 42nd floor of Hays Dynamics as the official partnership agreement was signed. The Hays Protocol, an artificial intelligence system designed to detect and prevent bias in customer service, had been deployed across Aurora Air's national network, and within just 7 days, it had identified more than 400 instances of prejudiced behavior patterns in employee interactions. Standing before dozens of cameras, Marcus Hays spoke in a calm, resonant voice. We can't change the past, but we can code the future. Equality isn't just a slogan. It must become the architecture in every line of code, every process, every decision. Beside him, Chloe Nguyen, now serving as the Global Diversity Project Director, smiled when a reporter asked how she felt. She replied simply, I just did what was right, and doing what's right changed the whole system. In the audience, Professor Samuel Porter sat quietly, his eyes warm. He had recently published an article in the Harvard Business Review titled "From Seat 2A to an Ethical Revolution When Leadership Turns Wounds into Systemic Strength." In it, he described Marcus as the man who redefined leadership not through power, but through principle. Meanwhile, the massive screen in the lobby displayed the financial news: Aurora Air recovers 20% of its stock value, becoming the first airline to receive the bias-free operation certification thanks to the Hays Protocol. 3 other airlines and 2 major hotel chains have signed memorandums of understanding to implement similar systems. Lauren walked up and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You just turned an act of discrimination into a global innovation." "Not bad, Marcus." He gave a faint smile. "I didn't build it to sell. I built it so no one else would have to buy back their justice." When the ceremony ended, Marcus stood alone by the window, watching the planes glimmer in the golden sunset as they departed from JFK, the very place where it had all begun. He thought of his mother, of Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, of Chloe, of the hundreds of passengers who had dared to speak up. And he understood now that justice doesn't land by miracle, but by ordinary people brave enough to fly against the wind. The evening light fell across his face, calm, steady, resolute. On the table beside him was a small plaque given by his employees, engraved with the words, "Seat 2, not a place, but a principle." Marcus smiled, because now he knew justice had found its own seat, and it would never be downgraded to economy again. 1 month later, at the Leadership and Ethics Summit in Washington, D.C., Marcus Hays walked onto the stage to a thunderous standing ovation. He didn't speak about crisis or stock prices or reputation. He told the story of a man asked to leave Seat 2A and of the hundreds of passengers who chose not to stay silent. "Justice doesn't come from power," he said, "but from the courage of those who believe that right is right, even when no one stands beside them." In the audience, Chloe quietly wiped her tears. Samuel Porter smiled and nodded. The stage lights reflected off the words glowing behind Marcus: "Equality takes flight when fairness learns to fly." He looked up toward the ceiling where the light poured down like the first line of dawn. In that moment, Marcus no longer saw himself as a victim of injustice, but as the pilot of change itself. Justice hadn't just landed. It was still flying in the hearts of those who dared to face the truth. 3 months later, Marcus Hays once again boarded a flight on Aurora Air. This time, no one asked him for identification. There were no suspicious glances, no cold, furrowed brows. Instead, the entire crew stood in formation, and the new CEO, Michael Freeman, the first black man to lead the airline, stepped forward and shook his hand. "We've kept Seat 2A for you, Mr. Hays," he said. "But now it belongs to everyone." Marcus smiled and walked into the cabin. The passengers in business class applauded. Some even stood to greet him. He didn't feel proud, only relieved, as if a circle had finally closed. As the plane ascended, the flight attendant's voice echoed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Today's flight operates under the Hays Protocol, where every person is treated with equal respect." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Outside, the clouds drifted farther and farther behind, and justice now had its own flight path, steady, enduring, and never again downgraded to a lower class. From the perspective of a leadership ethics expert, the journey of Marcus Hays is not just the story of a seat taken away. It is proof that fairness does not appear on its own. It is built by those who dare to stand tall in the face of injustice. Seat 2. A is no longer a symbol of privilege, but a reminder that every seat deserves equal respect. If you believe that justice doesn't need to shout to be heard, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to help spread stories of courage and change. And leave a comment below with a phrase that carries the power of this entire journey. Keep justice alive.